world. It is unpredictable, brutal, and often defined not only by weapons and strategy, but by the will of the men who fight it. In the eastern Ukrainian town of Dropilya, a moment unfolded that stunned soldiers, civilians, and analysts alike. A moment that has now been called one of the most dramatic turning points of the conflict. It wasn't a clash of tanks. It wasn't a devastating missile strike. It was something far more human. And far more shocking. It was a mass surrender. Dozens of Russian soldiers, unweary, hungry and cut off from supplies, walked into the open, placed their rifles on the ground, and raised their hands to the Ukrainian forces. Some carried makeshift white flags. Others simply walked forward in silence, and they surrendered. In broad daylight, this was no secret negotiation. No shadowy event in the dead of night. This was public, visible, undeniable. Civilians watched. Ukrainian soldiers stood in disbelief. The world saw men who just hours before were enemies choose survival over death. The forgotten town. That became a symbol. To understand why this surrender mattered so much, you have to understand Dropilya itself. It's not a city that makes global headlines. It doesn't carry the weight of Mariupol or the infamy of Bakhmut. For most of the world, Dropilya is just another small town in the war's endless frontline map. But for those living there, it has been a town caught in the storm. Control of Dropilya has shifted back and forth multiple times. Civilians have lived under shelling, occupation, and uncertainty. Shops open and close depending on who controls the road that week. For Ukraine, holding Dropilya means holding a key piece of the Eastern Front. For Russia, taking it was another step toward pushing deeper into Ukrainian land. That is why this surrender struck such a deep chord, because in this ordinary town, something extraordinary happened. What really happened that day? According to witnesses, Ukrainian soldiers first noticed movement on the opposite side. A group of Russian troops appeared, walking slowly, weapons slung but not aimed. Then, one by one, they began to lower their rifles, placing them carefully on the dirt. Some carried sticks with white cloths tied to them. Others just lifted their empty hands in the air. They walked forward. Not running, not hiding, just walking. Imagine the scene for a moment. Civilians hiding in basements peeked through cracks in doors. Ukrainian defenders, tense and prepared for a firefight, stared in disbelief. The Russian soldiers reached the middle of the road, dropped their gear, and either knelt or sat down, waiting quietly. It was a scene of total collapse. For soldiers who had been fighting, who had been told to hold the line, surrendering so openly meant something had broken inside. Not just supplies, not just strategy, but morale. Why did they surrender? Military analysts and psychologists agree. War is not only fought with guns. It is fought with endurance, with trust, with willpower. The Russian soldiers in Dropilya had none of those left. Cut off from supplies, reports suggest they had been without steady food and ammunition for days. Communication failures, radios silent, orders unclear, leaders absent, exhaustion. Some had barely slept. Many were young conscripts with little training. Hopelessness, surrounded by an enemy determined to defend their homes, with no reinforcements coming. When a soldier feels abandoned, he doesn't just lose the ability to fight. He loses the will to even try. And in Dropilya, that's exactly what happened. Survival over death for many of these soldiers. Surrender was not weakness, it was survival. Think about it. If continuing to fight means certain death, if no commander answers your calls, if your stomach is empty and your weapon nearly useless, what choice remains? For these men, raising their hands was not about honor or disgrace, it was about living another day. And that is what makes this story so deeply human. Because at its core, this was not about tanks or missiles. It was about men making the most primal choice of all. Life over death. How Ukraine responded, what happened next matters just as much. The Ukrainian forces handled the surrender with discipline and restraint. Weapons were collected. Prisoners were searched. The men were escorted away without unnecessary violence. In the chaos of war, where anger and revenge can easily take over, this discipline stood out. For the Ukrainians, it wasn't just about gaining prisoners. It was about sending a message. If you lay down your arms, you will live. That message is powerful. It spreads, and it plants doubt in the minds of other Russian units still fighting nearby. The symbolism of Dropilia. What happened in Dropilia is more than just a tactical event. It is a symbol. For Russia, it is a humiliation, a visible crack in the image of strength and unity it tries to project. For Ukraine, it is a triumph. A victory not only on the battlefield, but in the battle for morale and narrative. For the world, it is proof that persistence and support matter, that the fight is turning. Every surrendered soldier means fewer guns pointed at Ukrainian defenders. Every abandoned weapon means one less grenade, one less bullet. Every surrender whispers to other soldiers still in the field, you don't have to die here, and in war, whispers like that can spread like wildfire, beyond the battlefield, but surrender is not the end. For those Russian soldiers, it meant long days in Ukrainian custody, interrogations, uncertainty, a future that may include prisoner exchanges. For Ukraine, it meant extra responsibility. Prisoners must be fed, housed, and treated according to the laws of war. But it also meant leverage. Every prisoner is a bargaining chip. Every exchange tips the scale, and every surrender is another psychological blow to the Kremlin. The psychology of collapse wars are often described in terms of weapons, tanks, missiles, and drones. But the truth is, wars are decided long before bullets are fired. They are decided in the minds of the men who fight them. In Dropilia, the collapse was psychological. Soldiers fight for different reasons: loyalty, duty, ideology, or simply because they are ordered to. But when fear, hunger, and exhaustion outweigh all of those, the fighting spirit can vanish in an instant. Think about the Russian soldiers there. Many were young conscripts, drafted quickly with little or no training. Some were reluctant fighters, pushed into uniform against their will. Most had no personal stake in Ukraine's towns, no emotional tie to the ground they were told to capture. For Ukrainians, the fight is personal. They defend their homes, their families, their very survival. But for these Russian recruits, the war was distant, abstract. And when survival became the only calculation, surrender became inevitable. It's been said that an army's greatest weapon is morale. In Dropilia, morale collapsed, and with it, resistance, the shockwaves of surrender. What happened in Dropilia didn't stay in Dropilia. News of surrender travels quickly, faster than bullets, faster than tanks. Other Russian units hear the whispers. Did you see what happened in Dropilia? They surrendered, and they lived. Those whispers are dangerous for commanders, because once soldiers realize that surrender is not only possible but survivable, the will to fight begins to erode elsewhere too. For Ukrainian forces, this is a psychological victory. It proves that pressure works, that the enemy can be broken not only with firepower but with persistence. For Russia, it is a nightmare. A single surrender can spread like a disease, contagious, unstoppable, undermining discipline across entire battalions. International eyes on Dropilia. The world is watching. Images of soldiers surrendering under a bright Ukrainian sky flashed across international media. For Ukraine's allies, the pictures were proof that their support, weapons, training, funding, was making a difference. For critics of Russia, it was ammunition to highlight the cracks in Moscow's war machine. But beyond politics, the images struck something deeper. They reminded the world that war is fought by human beings, not faceless numbers, not just statistics, real men, making desperate choices in impossible situations. In the West, analysts dissected the footage, pointing to failures of supply and command. In Russia, state media struggled to explain it away, downplaying the event, calling it exaggerated. But the truth was visible, undeniable. Soldiers had surrendered. Dropilia becomes a symbol. For the people of Dropilia, this surrender was more than a headline. It was a moment of hope. Imagine living under months of shelling, constant fear, the sound of artillery at night. Then one morning you see enemy soldiers, the same men who once threatened your town, laying down their arms in defeat. For civilians, it was relief, a reminder that the tide could turn. For Ukrainian troops, it was validation, proof that their endurance was paying off. And for Russian command, it was a riddle with no easy answer. How do you rebuild trust in an army that has visibly chosen surrender over obedience? The strategic ripple effect. Every surrender reshapes the battlefield. Fewer enemy combatants. Each soldier who gives up is one less threat to Ukrainian defenders. Loss of equipment. Rifles, grenades, and ammunition abandoned become unusable for the enemy. Gain of intelligence. Captured soldiers often reveal valuable information under questioning. Shift in momentum. Most importantly, surrender shows that the enemy can be broken, not just killed. Dropilia, though small, may become a blueprint for what happens when pressure, persistence, and morale collide. Lessons for the future. Military experts will study Dropilia for years. They will note how a town that seemed insignificant on the map produced a moment that could influence the course of a much larger war. The lesson is simple, yet devastating. No matter how powerful an army is on paper, if its soldiers lose faith, its strength vanishes. This surrender is not just a tactical event, it is a warning to every military in the world. Weapons matter. Strategy matters. But without morale, no army can stand. A glimpse of humanity. At the heart of this story is not strategy, not politics, but humanity. When the Russian soldiers laid down their weapons, they revealed something that often gets buried beneath headlines. Soldiers are not machines. They are men who feel fear, who suffer hunger, who long to live another day. In choosing surrender, they showed that survival can outweigh ideology, that life can outweigh duty, and in doing so, they gave the world a moment that cut through the noise of war and reminded us of its most basic truth. War is not just about victory or defeat, it is about people. Closing reflection. Dropilia will not be remembered for its size or its geography. It will be remembered as the place where soldiers chose to stop fighting. For Ukraine, it is a beacon of hope. For Russia, it is a shadow of doubt. For the world, it is a reminder that even in the bloodiest conflicts, humanity still shapes the battlefield. And for history, it is proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a tank, or a missile, or a drone, but the human choice to lay down arms and walk away from war.